Then, of course, Satya Nadella came on, and this was again a big waste of time. They were talking about a bunch of emails and call earnings where Satya Nadella was saying that Xbox was doing great at for 3 quarters of back to back when there were shortages of PlayStation 5s and Xbox didn't have their shortages because they were buying all the silicon chips. And they were only highlighting that point, but if they looked at it from a global scale especially, they would have seen that Sony pretty much outside of maybe 3 months was market leader all the time. But they won't look at that because that discredits the FTC's position. So far, it's all about Microsoft recently having been pretty successful with the Xbox division. FTC now refers to an internal email from Satya to Phil and others where he asked about the present market share of Xbox versus PlayStation in North America. So this is about FTC's 2-horse race market definition, now moving onto cloud. The FTC really needs this market definition to be Xbox and PlayStation only, and for it to be focused on North America only. If it goes global, and if Nintendo and PC decide, if the Judge Corley accepts that PC and Nintendo Switch are part of the gaming sphere, and would come into this market definition, as Elizabeth Bailey confirmed, because at the end of the day, they still take a share of the market. Irrespective of how you look at it, there are people that only play on PC. There are people that will play games on the Nintendo Switch. If the Nintendo Switch wasn't there, they would either get an Xbox or a PlayStation 5 or go to PC. So to say that they don't, exist or they have no relevance is wrong. And she said, when you look at it on a whole global scale, well, and when you take it all into consideration, Microsoft has the smallest share. They are last place, and Nintendo and Sony are just way ahead of them. Quantifying PC is a little more difficult, but it's safe to say that PC is, in terms of share, is ahead of everyone. Of course, mobile is ahead of all of them. Senator explains how cloud is used as an adjunct, and it could be a substitute for consoles in the future. When consoles are no longer a thing, we're looking 10, 15, maybe even 20 years in the future. Nadella confirms that he explains on the fact that cloud gaming is integral to the experience. It's not streaming alone, but also Xbox Live. Satya Nadella says, as a software company, they always think software first and want to be on many platforms. That's kind of been his ethos since he's actually come in. It's all about software and being everywhere. And then, an email about MetaQuest from Sarah Bond to Phil Spencer and others referenced. Microsoft was part of the launch and showed many pieces of your software, including cloud gaming. Satya Nadella confirms. We want to make it clear to the world that Microsoft is cloud first. Hey, the next Windows operating system, Windows 365, is looking to be cloud-based as well. So this all supports and corroborates what he's actually saying. Satya Nadella confirms he discussed Microsoft's cloud streaming competitors with Phil Spencer. Why wouldn't he? They are competitors after all. But apparently that's a wrong thing to do according to the FTC, and that if they shouldn't be discussing other competitors. It was weird. The FTC just basically, and Satya Nadella's testimony was pretty bad overall. The FTC at one point did ask Satya Nadella about exclusives and how he felt about Microsoft having exclusives. And Satya Nadella told him that, exclusives do drive success. And you can see that with PlayStation. Now, if it was up to him, he doesn't like exclusives and he would like to abolish them. But he understands why they are needed. Because without the exclusives, you can't differentiate, and you kind of need to differentiate. But in an ideal world, Nadella said that exclusives are bad for players, for gamers, and that they shouldn't exist, and he doesn't want them to exist. But in the end, he also understands why they exist. So finally, they came to Professor Dennis Charlton. The FTC brings up he worked 600 to 650 hours for Microsoft on this matter at a rate of $2,000 per hour. It basically came to about 1.2 million. Why that was relevant, I don't know, but there you go. Now, this was actually really bad. This is where the FTC really gained an upper hand, because Professor Charlton worked on a specific point in what he was doing. He had a specific task, and he basically made a report based on that task. So the FTC then turned around and started asking him all sorts of questions. It was pretty bad because they were asking him questions outside of his report. His report was based on Call of Duty, and would Call of Duty, in its current state, with the contract offered to Sony, would it mean that Sony would get the console? I mean, would Sony get the game? And his finding was, not only would, if Sony agrees to a contract which is on better terms than the one he's been offered by Activision, he would be guaranteed without a shadow of doubt to get Call of Duty. Also, with Call of Duty being on the cloud, it just means more people are going to get Call of Duty. And the FTC did their absolute best to discredit him, because they needed to discredit him. They 100% needed to discredit him. FTC still examining Charlton. To put this into perspective, he found the FTC's experts' foreclosure model incorrect, and the moment he did that, they absolutely needed to destroy him. And they tried. They really, really tried. But that foreclosure theory has failed everywhere in the world, even the UK, where the CMA had to drop its console foreclosure theory of harm. The real issue with those expert fees is that the FTC and the CMA basically created an economic expert full employment program with their over-enforcement requiring the merging parties to explain things that should have been obvious after the first weeks of review. They're just now referencing documents by number. They reference a lot of documents, but they tried to contradict what he was saying, tried to put words into his mouth, tried to make him agree to stuff that he's not agreeing. At one point, the FTC was saying, well, look, if you look at section 64, you're not agreeing to this. And he goes, no, because I'm agreeing to it in 65. And they're going, well, look at 64. And he's like, but why would I look at 64 when you should be looking at 65? The footnote is at 65. And they're like, well, look at 64. And he's like, but why would I want to do that? I'm telling you that the footnote is at 65. And you're still telling me to look at 64, which is irrelevant. And then Judge Corley had to step in and tell them to move on, because clearly the FTC was just trying to badger the witness. It was stupid. Judge Corley again cut something short. Next question, by clarifying Professor Charlton read the contract Microsoft offered to Sony, even if it's not in the appendix of his report. They just were trying. Another FTC attempt to gain mileage failed. It was bad. It was really bad. They were really going after him. And as we saw towards the end, it was all a way to piss off the FTC lawyer. And, Professor Charlton really did piss off the lawyer. She was getting triggered like there was no tomorrow. FTC wanted to know whether Professor performed economic analysis of terms of Microsoft's offer to Sony, but as he explains now, he didn't do that and didn't have to, as the offer is consistent with commercial terms of existing agreements. So everything he was doing up until this point is fine. FTC asking Professor Charlton about whether he is aware of an agreement that Sony signed with ZeniMax about a particular game, Ghostwire. He doesn't recall that particular one, but also turns around and asks, why is this relevant? I'm not here to talk about Ghostwire, I'm here to talk about Call of Duty. Because then the FTC lawyer turned around and goes, can you compare the two agreements between Call of Duty and ZeniMax? And he's like, why? It's totally irrelevant. We're not here to talk about ZeniMax. We're not here to talk about Diablo. We're not here to talk about any other game outside of Call of Duty. And that is the one that I was tasked to look at. And that is what my report is based on. Asking me to look at other contracts that were not privy to me or were not purview to me is irrelevant and doesn't hold candle. Professor Charlton believes that there may be a misunderstanding here, and with respect to the revenue split, he was referring specifically to Call of Duty, because they were trying to put other games into it, like Diablo, Overwatch, and so forth. We all know that Activision got special terms from Sony for COD, publisher friendlier than otherwise. The FTC is again acting like a Sony representative. They were pretty much a pro when it comes to this. This time, not in terms of specially demanding concessions, but by attacking the terms Microsoft offered. Microsoft offered Sony better terms than Activision, and they were attacking it, which according to Microsoft are even better than the one Sony currently has in place of ABK. It was becoming a calamitous joke. The FTC is acting against US economic interests here. COD is a crown jewel of the US entertainment industry, unlike Ghostwire, frankly. And the FTC doesn't want whoever owns COD to be able to get a better revenue split than one gets for the average game, which is weird. In fact, they wanted Sony to have the same deal as Microsoft once Microsoft bought them. It made no sense. So far, it seems that Professor Carlton made no mistake on anything. I don't think he personally did. He answered them and triggered them and pissed them off. But all in all, he didn't really do anything for Microsoft, and he didn't really do anything for the FTC. Even though the FTC kind of thought he did, it really wasn't that the case in this courtroom situation, as Dr. Elizabeth Bailey, but doesn't render his work less reliable. I think they did poke enough holes in there that could render his work unreliable, but at the same time, the holes that they were poking were not areas that he was deemed to be looking into. As such, I don't think it should count. Why is the FTC acting in that appalling way and trying to argue that revenue split for whoever owns COD should not be more favorable than for an average game like Ghostwire? But it's okay for Sony to get those favorable deals. They have no problem with that. Like I said, exclusive to PlayStation. They're not doing it for consumers, and if they did do it for consumers, like I said, they would be winning. Or competition, only for their extremist agenda to support PlayStation. The FTC just doesn't want to accept that Microsoft's offer to Sony as a reality that strongly weighs against the FTC's idiotic, rejected in the rest of the world, even UK, console foreclosure theory. So they criticize the terms on an unreasonable basis. It doesn't make sense why they would even criticize the contract offer by Microsoft. The FTC's case is so weak anyway that the question of whether a remedy is already in place has been offered will not even have to be reached. The FTC has a problem with every single element of this case, starting with market definition. And it looks like their market definition is going to go out the window anyway, because if I was Judge Corley, I would not say that gaming is just a United States of America thing. It is a global thing. Satya Nadella also confirmed it's a global thing. There's just no hiding that. His recollection is that he was trying to categorize the agreement, and that was referring to the NVIDIA agreement. The FTC is still nowhere near getting an injunction, but based on how this examination of Professor Carlton has gone so far, it's possible that Judge Corley is now skeptical of parts of his expert testimony. That still wouldn't make a difference in it. See, as I was saying, I can see them completely throwing out testimony, but I can also see them throwing out Professor Lee's testimony, which was even worse than Professor Charlon. The only one that was actually worth its salt is Elizabeth Bailey. Coming to the end now, all that Microsoft needs to do is identify issues with the FTC's economic expert testimony. I believe that was already achieved just through the cross-examination of the FTC's expert. Plus, Dr. Bailey's testimony is likely to be deemed reliable and relevant. Like I said, she was a superstar. Judge Corley to Professor Carlton, what were you aware of when you wrote your report and formed your opinion? Again, here showing that she's basically a little bit skeptical of his work, but even so, I don't think it's going to have much of an issue on the outcome. We've seen 3 economic expert witnesses here. Bailey outperformed the other 2 by a wide margin. Like I said, she was really good. When Professor Carlton wanted to elaborate on an answer after saying correct, Judge cut him short, correct, so they could move on because they were running out of time. Funny that the FTC refers to Google Stadia testimony for the simple scientific fact that the further away the server is, the greater the latency, and the more latency, the worse the user experience. That's simply physics, doesn't require industry expertise. They also brought up the Nintendo's topic, saying if a game looks worse on Nintendo, that means it'll run bad as well and stuff like that. It was just, they were really reaching. Now that the FTC was done with the examination, Microsoft had a couple of minutes to get their questions in, and the first clarification they made was primary focus of Carlton's work was evaluation of the reliability of the FTC expert share and foreclosure models. Professor Carlton explains that Professor Lee's share model is actually a demand model. What matters, according to Professor Carlton, is not make share, but a change in Xbox sales as a result of a hypothetical foreclosure. Professor Carlton points out an issue with Professor Lee's testimony. Some customers may choose another option than Xbox. If there is foreclosure of the PlayStation, basically removing the game from PlayStation altogether, and he's basically referring to PC or cloud, or even in the potentiality that the game goes to Nintendo. Just because it comes off the PlayStation platform, if it's available on everything else, it doesn't mean that they're going to go and play this on, Xbox. They can pick it up on PC. They can go and get it on GeForce Now. They can get it elsewhere. It doesn't necessarily mean, and this is something Professor Lee completely disregarded. And that was essentially it. That's the whole thing for today. But all in all, I think today's situation, Bobby Kotick was poor, but he did make one point. Bobby Kotick, like I said during the beginning of the video, when he was asked if he's so hell-bent against cloud gaming and streaming, why is he agreeing with it with Game Pass? And rightfully so, Bobby Kotick turned around and said, once they've bought it and given me my $79 billion, I don't care, because I don't have to agree with them for this to work. As long as it's under my rule, it's not going to happen. But once they're in charge, we can agree to disagree, but what they do is up to them. It's not up to me anymore. So, and Judge Corley accepted that, basically saying, so under your rule and your guidance, this is an unlikely thing to happen. And he said, yes, it's very, very unlikely that cloud and streaming will ever get it day one, because we stand to lose a lot of money. He just said he can't see a world where that would happen unless, he got like $10 billion or $20 billion or $100 billion, in which case he said no one's going to do that. So, in a hypothetical situation, sure, I could do it. But the reality is that's never going to happen. And Satya Nadella's testimony was pretty poor. Nothing really came out of it outside the fact that he agreed that exclusives are bad for the industry, but it's also a necessity to, differentiate your platform. Bailey again smashed it, and of course Charlton, he was terrible all the way up until Microsoft's cross-examination, and in 2 questions he completely redeemed himself. Those 2 questions were enough for him to completely and utterly redeem himself for the 1-hour battering that he took. He took an hour's battering from the FTC's lawyers, and when I say battering, they completely and utterly destroyed him. And he soaked all that up, triggered them like there's no tomorrow, played them along like a fiddle, and then all it took was 2 questions from the Microsoft lawyers, and he completely obliterated their 1-hour argument. Completely obliterated it. But if you're asking me now who won on the day, honestly, I don't think any of them won. If anything, Microsoft may have had the upper hand in the end, but the Bobby Kotick one, I'd say, was slightly more in favor of Xbox, only ever so slightly. The Bailey one, clearly Microsoft would have been ahead in that one. The Nvidia one was kind of a tie. Even though they were happy, there was a bit of negativity there. And when it came to Charlton, that hour battering that he took probably is going to stay in the memories of people more than the 2 questions he did, which completely dropped the mic and said, game over. Because that is what he did at the end. And I think the judge pretty much took that on board and may have accepted that as gospel. But we'll see. Tomorrow's case, well, there's a few more people to speak, but they're going to get the closing statements tomorrow, and that should be essentially it. Friday should be just them finalizing documents, so I don't think we're going to get anything on Friday. So I think tomorrow should be the final one, but we will see. Anyway, that's it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Remain legend.